Ms. Paris, as I look at your career, I see the career of someone who has been an activist, and I believe a radical activist. You have waged litigation campaigns and opposed voter ID laws. You have opposed voter integrity laws. You have opposed prohibitions on ballot harvesting. You have advocated for felons being able to vote. As I look at your record year after year after year of being an extreme partisan advocate, I'm left with the very likely conclusion that if you were confirmed to the bench, you would likewise be a radical activist on the bench. Voter ID laws, as Senator Lee just pointed out, you described as the greatest rollback of voting rights in this country. 80% of Americans support voter ID laws. 60% of African Americans support voter ID laws. Do you believe voter ID laws are constitutional?
Senator Cruz, the Supreme Court has said that there are no per se restrictions against voter ID laws in Crawford.
I asked what you believe. I was one of the parties litigating in Crawford, so I'm very well familiar with that case and led a coalition of states defending voter ID laws, and Justice Stevens wrote the majority opinion upholding Indiana's voter ID law. My question to you is, do you believe voter ID laws are constitutional?
Senator, I believe they are constitutional. I believe that they can be constitutional because the Supreme Court has said they can be constitutional, and in Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court gets to decide. That is what our system depends on. We have a concept of vertical stare decisis. We have rules of law. We have precedent.
Ms. Paris, just a couple of months ago, in March of 2021, you said that the voter ID laws that had been passed were due to, I'm going to quote you to get your words right, anxiety over the browning of America, and people having anxiety of the fact that certain folks in power are not going to be able to stay in power. Do you believe the 80% of Americans who support voter ID laws and the 60% of African Americans who support voter ID laws are doing so because they're concerned about the browning of America?
Senator, that quote is clearly referring to politicians. It's not referring to African Americans.
Which politicians here do you believe are concerned about the browning of America?
Senator, that context was with respect to state politicians.
So it's only state politicians?
Senator, that context that I'm on record for, we're referring to state politicians.
All right, well, let's talk about politicians here in this body. As you know, I filed an amicus brief on behalf of 11 senators in the Brnovich case. You made a comment that the brief that I filed was outrageous and harmful. Do you stand by that characterization?
Senator, the Supreme Court, as you know, issued its decision in the Brnovich case and struck down, and upheld the restrictions on Arizona.
Okay, I'd like you to answer my question. Do you stand by the characterization that the amicus brief that I filed on behalf of 11 senators was, quote, outrageous and harmful? That's how you characterized it.
Senator, the Supreme Court has issued its ruling on
I'm going to try again. Do you stand by your characterization? I'm not asking you what the Supreme Court did. You described an amicus brief filed on behalf of 11 senators as outrageous and harmful. Do you stand by what you said just a few months ago?
Senator, what I said as an advocate when it was pending before the court is not relevant to the issue before you.
Do you stand by it or do you retract it? You have a choice.
Senator, as an advocate, I pursue.
Okay, you're going to refuse to answer me on that. I assume you also believe the Supreme Court's 6-3 decision agreeing with the position advocated in my amicus brief. I assume you believe that decision was also outrageous and harmful because that's the language you used.
Senator, the Brnovich case is the law of the land. It has been settled.
So you're not going to answer that either?
The law of the land has been settled. What I am going to say, Senator, is that I am pledging to apply precedent.
So at the time you discussed the brief filed by a number of senators on this committee as outrageous and harmful. At that time, had you had any discussions with the Biden administration about being nominated to be a judge?
I would need to remember the timing a little bit.
When was the first discussion you had with the Biden administration about being nominated to be a judge?
I would need to reference my Senate Judiciary questionnaire because that's where I recorded it. I don't have it committed to memory.
So you have advocated that felons should be able to vote. Do you believe all felons should vote?
Senator, my work and advocacy has been on behalf of persons who are living and working in the community.
Do you believe currently incarcerated prisoners in jail should be allowed to vote?
Senator, I have been advocating on behalf of people who
You're
are
not answering my question. I didn't ask what you've advocated in the past. I'm asking what you believe.
Senator, the canons of judicial ethics preclude me from answering that question because a situation may come before me.
So let me ask you this. You have advocated in favor of a living Constitution, and indeed, as both Senator Hawley and Senator Lee asked you about, you have disparaged those who believe in originalism as essentially racist and bigots. How do you think you will be able to serve with colleagues on the Court of Appeals if you have disparaged their constitutional interpretation as racist and bigoted? And secondly, why is it that when you advocate a, quote, living Constitution, that somehow the livingness of it always makes the Constitution agree with the policy positions you happen to embrace? How is that consistent with democracy, to have a judge able to implement whatever policy positions you believe in?
Senator, we have had more than 24 amendments added to the Constitution since it was ratified in 1788.
But that's not what a living Constitution is. A living Constitution means you as a judge, if you're a judge, can change it to whatever you want, and that the voters don't get to speak on it. Isn't that right?
Senator, women now have the right to vote.
We passed an amendment for that. That's a terrific victory, and it was done the right way through an amendment. A living Constitution is judges changing it. Why is judges changing the Constitution to meet their policy preferences, consistent with any respect for the democratic process and the ability of voters to decide policy issues?
Senator, it is clear that our great Constitution is one that is enduring. It is clear with things like Brown versus Board overruling Plessy versus Ferguson that evolution happens. It is also clear that our great Constitution establishes separation of powers. There are bodies like this one that engage in policymaking. There are judges that review the cases and controversies that are put before them. I am pledging, by accepting this nomination, that I am going to cease being an advocate, and I would impartially, without reservation, objectively apply the law to the facts of the case and controversy before me.
Well, your record is overwhelmingly to the contrary.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses who are here today. Ambassador Sherman, as you and I have discussed at length, I have very deep concerns with the Biden administration's approach to Iran. I believe the Biden administration has consistently demonstrated weakness and appeasement towards Iran, and I believe that weakness and appeasement only invites further conflict and further risk of loss of human life. In the last 6 months, the Ayatollah has declared open season on the United States and our interests. The Iranians have attacked American forces repeatedly and killed a U.S. military contractor. They have tried to conduct terrorism on U.S. soil, even going so far as attempting kidnapping of an American journalist on American soil, sending an Iranian kidnap team to our country. They have launched attack after attack after attack on our Arab allies. They have launched multiple attacks on civilian vessels, including an attack on an Israeli ship, and killed citizens from 2 close U.S. allies, Great Britain and Romania. And in just the last few hours, there are reports of yet more ships being hit by Iranian mines. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has again and again declined to respond to these attacks. And worse, the Biden administration has revoked terrorism sanctions against Iran's terrorist proxies in Yemen. Your administration has removed Iranian officials from sanctions. You've dialed back enforcement of oil sanctions, including violations by the Chinese Communist Party. You've unlocked Iranian accounts worth billions of dollars to allow Iran to pay down debts, and pointedly, you have repeatedly declined to respond to Iranian attacks against our troops and haven't imposed a single new sanction. Why is it that the Biden administration has not responded and responded forcefully to these repeated Iranian attacks?
Senator, you and I, as you note, have an ongoing discussion about how best to ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon, that it stops its state sponsorship of terrorism, that it stops its malign behavior in the region, that it stops putting our allies and partners at risk. We both have the same objective, and that is to ensure that our people and those of our partners and allies are protected, and to ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon and stops its malign behavior. So we are in agreement on the objective. We have a disagreement about the means. I do not agree with some of what you have put on the table. I believe the Biden administration has had maximum sanctions.
Name one sanction you've imposed on Iran.
We have added additional entities on an ongoing basis as we have the evidentiary information about those entities.
But is your strategy working? Are they stopping the attacks or are they scaling them up?
Senator, nothing has stopped the attacks by Iran. The killing of Qasem Soleimani did not deter the Iranians from attacks.
Now, is the reason that you haven't responded, do you lack the authorization to respond?
We do not lack the authorization to respond, and the president has taken strikes both in February and in June against Iranian-backed militia. So, Senator, I think we probably will not come to an agreement on this, on how best to approach Iran, but I do appreciate that we have the same objective.
So the debate Congress is having over the 2002 AUMF, I very much support Congress reasserting its authority over the war-making authority of our government. I think that is an important constitutional authority. But I worry that this debate is occurring in the context of the Biden administration's embrace of Iran and the Ayatollah, and that the repeal of the AUMF will be used as justification for continuing to go soft on Iran. The White House has stated in a June 14th statement of administration policy that, quote, the United States has no ongoing military activities that rely solely on the 2002 AUMF as a domestic legal basis, and repeal of the 2002 AUMF would likely have minimal impact on current military operations. That statement uses the word current very precisely. Is it the position of the Biden administration that the 2002 AUMF was necessary for any of the operations against Iran undertaken in the past 10 years?
I can have the lawyer speak to the last 10 years. What I can say is that the strikes that were taken in February and June against Iran-backed militia were taken on the basis
Let me ask you
of
specifically
Article 2.
about the one you referenced a minute ago, which is the attack on General Soleimani. Do you believe that that was legally authorized, number one, and number two, did it require the 2002 AUMF to have authorization?
I was not part of that administration, but my understanding is that Article 2 was used as the primary authority for taking that strike.
And what is the Biden State Department's position now? Was that strike authorized by Article 2 or not?
I defer to my...
I'm asking the Biden State Department.
I refer to the State Department's lawyer.
Good morning, Senator.